So, there are three kinds of people in this world. Those who get math and those who don't. So, Synod is done, and I am one of the people traumatized just by witnessing it. I can only try to imagine what it was like to have been there. I was gutted, actually, Wednesday and Thursday. Usually I'm pretty bored, but this year I was traumatized. And so I'm on a bit of a self-imposed timeout from discussing specifics because I'm nursing that trauma, trying to figure out where it comes from and how to address it, how to recover from it. And that part of Synod's effect on me is about personal work, not public. But I do have thoughts to share publicly because I have an analytical side. And I'm, by profession, a specialized transitional minister. And in that work, when there's been a trauma event, we learn to work to get into the balcony, as we call it, to get into the hot air balloon and rise above. Today we would say to get a drone's eye view of the situation. And we do that to try to see what is going on in the system itself while not being engaged in it. And this video is my attempt, or at least one of my attempts, to do some of that. In this video, I'm riffing directly from Paul VanderKlay's video where he did some of the same thing. But I want to try for a little bit more altitude to identify bigger patterns that I believe to be driving what happened. Where Paul, in his videos, at least about the church, is about history and philosophy. These are clear strengths of his, along with theology. I'm about sociology, relationalology, along with the theology. So I'm going to make reference to a couple things that he says in that video and kind of riff from those. I agree with Paul when he says, family, the Synod revealed that we are a family or a clan that appears to be heading for a breakup. He brought it down more specifically to a couple heading for divorce, but I think it's a clan question. And he highlighted how in the several advisory groups, and this happened, I believe, last year as well, reported that they had gained great value from the face-to-face, in-person work that they had done. And it was so valuable that they seem to need each new reporting team that comes up, they need to mention that. And it makes me, frankly, very curious about how that works. I've never been part of that. But I celebrate that that is the case. And then Paul says at around 1:53, all my time references are approximate, in his video he says, this is face-to-face processing in service of a judicial decision. And that is, my thoughts launched at one point off of that when watching his video. A lot of times when I'm watching his videos, I'm speaking to the screen. And so this video of mine is my own version of that. This time I make notes first and then I speak in response. Face-to-face processing in service of a judicial type decision. It's bang on. And it names the frustration that happens on the floor, where in the face-to-face work in the committees, that frustration, there may have been frustration, but something else was able to allow them to proceed. But when they get to the floor, they can't anymore. So here's one of the big themes that I see. there were two very different Christianity-derived worldviews active at Synod. And I'm going to call them the confessional, and you could say traditional and a bunch of other words, and the relational. That's the face-to-face piece. Please understand me right off the bat that both are important. I skew towards the relational side of it now in my life. But they are two very different worldviews speaking different languages. Where confessional is all about propositions and affirming truth statements, relational is about story and affirming connection. Let me say that again. Where the confessional worldview is about propositions and affirming truth statements, the relational is about story and affirming connection. Now, Synod is about decisions, not relationship. Its structure itself even comes from a long history of a time when science thinking believed the rational part of us was not fallen or the least fallen of our being, and so could figure out the things of God. And that's where we have the science of theology. So you have a process of motions, grounds, and arguments, which are all propositional. And as Paul VanderKlay said, we saw face-to-face processing in service of a judicial decision. So there are many reports of this face-to-face going amazingly, even being mountaintop spiritual experiences. That is relational. But when you get to the floor of Synod, and it's supposed to be about propositions again. And the relational are often not good at working in the world of propositions. It's a legal world. It's a doctrinal world. And it's different. Recently, we were at a friend's place who is a judge in process of retiring. And she said a most interesting thing to me when I was having a conversation with her about how people misunderstand the purpose of the law, how they want justice, but what that really means is punishment for the person that did them wrong. And she surprised me completely by saying that being a judge and possibly a lawyer, but she was speaking in context of judge, we deal with grief all day. Grievances that are expressions of grief. And I thought of that a few times when I was watching some of the Synod proceedings. Propositional statements are not ways of dealing with grief or grievance. So that led to the moment that I believe Synod became real, at least for me, as someone more on the relational scale, and no longer judicial or academic. And the relational pain aspect surfaced and broke into the room. Paul shows it in his video beginning at around 7:22. A person from the Committee 7 Minority Report asks from the floor a point-blank question. And then it's interesting because a point-blank question like that is often used by the confessional people, the propositional people, but it's in the form of a story, and it's even somewhat distant from the issues at hand. It's simply about doubt. She asks this point-blank question of the reporter for the majority report. They'd been in committee together. The whole thing runs till around 13:30 in Paul's video. It rocked me to my core at several levels. And you can see from the video, especially when it pans the floor, that it did so for many delegates as well. The real fear was named. The story, the relational story, came into the propositional world. Exclusion because of uncertainty. And cause for fear was legitimized by the reporter, who I take belonged on the conservative side of all of this. It was legitimized, the fear was legitimized by the reporter talking about conservatives or people who supported confessional status for the interpretation of the word chastity or unchastity, including same-sex activity. He referred to them as being jerks, which I translate as graceless. And I've seen some of that myself. I knew what he was talking about, because that's what the internet has allowed to happen, where we have access, where we did not before, where these things would happen behind closed doors. At around 1433, Paul points out that we're attempting to have a confessional conversation across two completely different belief sets. And I add to that, until representatives from each of those two worldviews start to see that and find a way to have it translated to each other, we will remain stuck where we are. Confessional language and relational language are different, very different. I agree with Paul when he talks about the role of unity, that this kind of unity that comes in communal confession. That's around 19, going on 20 minutes. And he talks about that being like a couple in counseling, both admitting to past wrongs and the relief that is felt. And then the determination that comes from that to both do better. They might verbally even commit to that. What is not understood in that moment is that the worldviews making confession in search of absolution are Mars and Venus. And so they are at odds again, because doing better is not defined the same for both. So again, I say, until representatives from both of those groups start looking at that honestly in terms of their own worldviews, we're not going to be able to find ways of talking across the gap. At around 44 minutes, Paul begins talking about doubling down on the safe harbor. On the one hand, he says, you confess, which makes you feel small, and you do that communally, then you all together feel equally small. But then you move, righteous indignation, on the other hand, is something that makes you feel large. And moving into righteous indignation from confession is leveraged or pumped up by what I call blame shifting and what he refers to as scapegoating. Scapegoating being a biblical concept, although what Cain does is blame shifting, so that's a biblical concept as well. The whole interior purpose, I think, of those, at least when I do it, is to avoid looking at one's own culpability. When we're doing that, we are negating one of the great lessons of God's word. Search your own heart first. And I would add a little bit of preaching to that, in the sense of search your own heart first, see the darkness, see the misery in your own heart, see its tendency towards hardness, and then be warmed and melted by the grace of God despite that. End of preaching diversion. When this blame shifting and scapegoating is going on, we will find ourselves and our in-group saying things like, yeah, but they, and we will hear a lot of attributing motive to the actions of the other group. We'll attribute pure motives to all of our actions and impure to those of the group that we don't understand. And of course, the motives attributed fit the need to pump up the righteous indignation that we want to feel again, having just confessed. So one of the things the internet has done is bring that thinking out of the locker room and into the public eye. I have a phrase I've made up that I've fallen in love with. It's called preaching to the choir in the locker room. That's a double layer of that. And that preaching to the choir in the locker room, where we think our thoughts are only for the in-group, gets more and more public each day, it seems. And it is talk done there that inflates the righteous indignation of your in-group and the animosity towards what is chosen as the scapegoat or the enemy. And those parties are clear in what developed at Synod, but I don't want to distract by details like that, at least not at this point. Inasmuch as that dynamic creates or supports the in-group starts to feel large and strong and justified in it. And so they will say, but the Bible teaches this truth, or the other ones will say, but the Bible contains this story. Not understanding that stories don't speak well to confessionalists, to propositionalists. And confessionalists and propositionalists don't understand that truth statements don't carry the same weight as story and relationship for the relationalists. And at 4653-ish, Paul brings up René Girard. We both kind of discovered him at the same time, quite a number of years ago now, and had conversations about that on CRC Voices back in the day. And he talks about going from then confession to moral indignation at around 48:18. And at 51:18, Paul nails that the pattern is being followed for other reasons than healing the wounds of the past. And so I add to that a call to the fact that that is what everyone needs to examine. Why do I do that? Why do I default to scapegoating and blame shifting? He's totally right as well towards the end of the video that pastoral care has in our culture become nearly synonymous with being nice, and that it means different things to the propositionalists, or the concretists is another way of describing it, and the relationalists. Completely different things. In fact, both of those groups have very different ideas of Jesus himself. Now back to a few of more of my own thoughts. Some of us in this corner of the CRC are reading Andrew Root, who is one person from within Christianity. There are others who are adjacent to Christianity saying similar things, which is very, very interesting. Tom Holland, although I think he's become part of Christianity now, but when he was still outside of it was saying things like this. Andrew Root is saying that we don't realize how much we are shaped by cultural trends, even as Christians. We think that our understanding of Christianity is immune or isolated from cultural trends. For me, the mistakenness of this shows up in the opinions expressed by those new to North America, which tend to be rather conservative, socially and theologically in their positions. It's simply because they've not been exposed to the same supposedly secular trends that we have. Again, a topic that could be dug into way more. So my balcony view sees hints of this, though it's always kind of like a passing glimpse, not ever really very clearly that you can grab it. Let me try explain. The cultural trend we've been in for the past couple of decades towards acceptance of same-sex attraction and same-sex matrimony, it's much broader than that, but I'm trying to stay focused, is shaping the worldview of those who are considered affirming in ways they might not see. And they need to see it for a bit. Particularly, as Paul already hinted, as the secular views, the views of society, are rolling back some of the changes that have been made. So they need to examine that. They speak what is truth to them and what they see as biblically derived, without self-critique about the sources. On the other hand to that, the cultural backlash to things progressive is empowering the worldview expression and pumping up the worldview expression of those who want to return to what they believe existed before. They do not seem aware that they too are products of their times, of so-called secular trends. And if they are aware, they do not seem self-critical. I don't hear them mentioning it. Those are a few of the bigger worldview and systemic problems that seem to be revealed by Synod 2023 and 2022, and which Paul's video helped me think more clearly about for myself. So let me reiterate. There are three kinds of people in this world. Those who get theology and those who don't. I'm Pete VanderKlay, and that's some of my thinking today.